Topic, never let a good crisis go to waste, addressing Russia's structural economic reforms. I'd love to believe that the room is packed because you've all come to see me, but I suspect it may have something to do with the quality of our guests and the panel that we're bringing to you today. So in a minute, we're going to start the conversation and I will be directing the traffic ultimately, but I'm hoping that our panelists here, both from government and the business community and from the academic arena, will feel comfortable enough in this very intimate situation to jump in on each other if they feel that there are points that they want to make or they want to pick up on what somebody else has said, or indeed for fear if they might actually disagree with something that's been said. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a very interactive and stimulating conversation, everybody. So before we get into this, what I have for you is a short video that's been prepared by the forum, not by CNBC. This is from the forum. They just wanted to set out a few of the issues that we're going to try and deal with in this session. So let's roll the tape.
Of Russia's economy relates to how low oil prices, sanctions, Russia's shift to Asia and its macro strains will define its economy over the short and medium term. Perhaps a more fundamental question is whether the presence of these forces makes now the time for deep and politically committed structural reform. Low oil prices are a reminder that diversifying and investing in more value-added production makes Russia less vulnerable to commodity price cycles. Once oil prices rebound, some of the pressure to take difficult steps towards diversification will be removed. On the other hand, drastic reform now could add too much pain to an economy that has recently stabilized but is still under strain. And there is the question of whether Russian governmental institutions need restructuring as a precursor to instituting sustainable economic reforms. There are compelling arguments for reform now. The devalued ruble has given Russia's domestic metals industry an advantage over foreign competitors and could do the same for manufacturing as a whole. The low ruble, matched with Russia's ban on food imports from countries levying sanctions, has also increased demand for locally grown produce. With 9% of the world's arable land, Russia has the capacity for intensive agricultural expansion, and with investment, it has the opportunity to value up its entire food chain. China and Russia committed to joint investments in agriculture numbering in the billions just last month, showing that the Sino-Russian partnership is about more than gas. Russia is also actively strengthening ties elsewhere. Diversifying trade partners is one step. Diversifying its domestic economy will be harder. It requires investment, which in turn requires curbing capital flight, enhancing the legal and financial infrastructure to attract institutional investors, and putting the plumbing in place to connect ventures with capital. Competition needs to increase as import substitution policies kick in so that innovation enterprises can expand, even disrupt, while chronic problems in industrial productivity are addressed. Whether Russia is adequately prepared to take on such fundamental change remains to be seen. Big structural shifts are never simple to implement. One reason for Russia not to let a good crisis go to waste.
So there you go. I hope you all understand now what's on the table as a result of that rather breathless delivery about the state of the Russian economy currently. What I'd just like to quickly do before I introduce what I'm going to say is do a quick name check of everybody that's with us. Not so much as to introduce them formally, but just to make sure they're actually here, given that we have so many panelists with us. So let's just start at this end. Alexei Ulyakayev, you know very well, Anton Silyanov, Alexei Kudrin, Andrei Makarov, Mikhail Shamalin, and Oleg Vyugun. Very nice to have you gentlemen along, and I hope as representatives from the commercial and business, Mikhail Shamalin and Oleg Vyugun. Very nice to have you gentlemen along, and I hope as representatives from the commercial and business community, you have some strong views to express to the gentlemen on this side of the room. And just to the front row, let me mention Dennis Nally. Dennis, thank you for being here. Christopher Pissarides, and of course Frederick William Engdahl. Thank you very much for coming as well. So let me just say very quickly my piece on this. As a journalist who's been coming in and out of Russia for many years now, I've looked at the last 18 months and I have perhaps been slightly concerned about what I've seen as someone who daily reports on business and markets for CNBC out of London. I make no apologies for the fact that mine is an Anglo-Saxon free market economic perspective, and you'll forgive me if my statements are guided by that perspective through the next hour and 15 minutes. But as I look to what I've seen over the last 18 months, I've seen a new Russian data privacy law come into place, which is going to make it difficult for international internet-related .com businesses to set up and operate here. I've seen new rules on media partnerships and ownerships that will restrict foreign ownership to some 20% of a business. That law will come into being later this year. We've seen increased state ownership. I don't want to spend too much time on the Bashnev case because those involved will have their own position on what that represented. But to an outsider, it looked like another piece of private property that was returned to state control and currently remains under state control. A privatization program that Mr. Kudrin championed so many years ago now has gone on the back burner. What happened to that privatization program? And as I've just spoken with Boris Titov, who feeds his reports annually into President Putin on the state of entrepreneurialism in this country, what he said to me was, costs are going up, taxes are going up, tariffs are going up. It's becoming more expensive to do business as an entrepreneur here. Corruption is improving, but not fast enough. And red tape, which is that plague of all businessmen wherever they operate in the world, is not being dismantled fast enough as far as he's concerned. And that's the message that he's fed into President Putin in his latest report. So that's where I stand on a number of things I've seen happen over the last 18 months. But look, Russia's had a tough time. The combination of sanctions, falling commodity and oil prices, and of course the ruble volatility has produced something of a circling of the wagons, if you like, and maybe a psychology that's focused back on the past rather than looking forward to what could be done in the future. We've also seen a pivot towards China as a way perhaps of moving on the Russian economic model that used to work on a three-legged stool. You had the middle class, you had the minerals and resources businesses that exported, and that generated wealth and a feel-good for the Russian economy. So all of that was good, but there have been challenges over the last 18 months. So how do we address some of the challenges? Hopefully, what we're going to hear here today is some constructive proposals about how we deal with some of the problems. Because the maths tells you everything. An employed population of 76 million, but in terms of how many of those Russian workers add value to the economy, maybe 15 million. That's an estimate that the economists have put forward. The Russian worker's productivity is 50% of his German colleagues, and the numbers look even worse against some other metrics. Are the goals, and this is what I want to know from our gentlemen on the panel, are the goals still for Russia to deregulate and move towards a market economy? Is it to stifle corruption wherever it may be found? And is it to diversify away still from the extractive industries? And I'd like to put all of those questions, if I can, to the economy minister to start off with, Mr. Ulyakayev.
Thank you very much for that possibility. You know, in Chinese language, the character crisis has two pieces. First, pain, problems, and the second, possibility. Okay? So we have to find possibility to move forward. What does it mean, move forward? It means to make shorter the gap between Russian economy and developed countries' economy. Okay, now we have some disbalance between potential growth and actual growth. But potential growth is not very high also. We very much believe that by the end of this year, we will pass by the recession period of time. And the next year will be closer to potential growth. But potential growth is 2 point something % of GDP. It's still lower than average in the world. Average growth is between 3.5, 3.8% for this year and for the nearest future. And the point is to have the Russian growth higher than average. That's the way to make shorter this distance between developed countries and us. What have to be done for that? I'd like to remind the Adam Smith definition. For the economic growth, you need two things: peace and easy taxation. Okay, we will talk probably about, by peace here we can think about sanction, counter-sanction, and others. By easy taxation, it means not only taxes themselves, because if we compare Russian tax burden, official tax burden, with the European countries, for instance, we will see that it's much lower. But let us compare it with the Southern Eastern Asia countries, with the BRICS countries, with the other former Soviet Union republics, and we will see that it's higher. In accordance with that, our friends and competitors.
But is
plus non-taxation fees and revenues, like trade fee and others. And of course, the third one you mentioned, it's regulation burden. That is three things we will concentrate on that.
But what specific measures have been taken to change the direction of travel for the underlying economy? Because Russia will get out of jail next year, but it will do that because the oil price has rebounded, and it will do that because it has found some efficiencies within its own businesses. But ultimately, I think, as Tony Blair said here yesterday, you can keep beating the same economy and force it to generate at a little bit of a higher level. But that is not ultimately the answer. You have to change the model and allow animal spirits to run free if you believe in the market. Does Russia today believe in the market still, Mr. Ulyakayev?
We still do believe in market, and I think we are doing something to support the market fundamentals of the economy. I mean the regulation, of course. Look, we announced that the tax rising holidays up to at least 2018. We're saying with the quasi-fiscal, quasi-tax burden, plus some measures about deregulation of economy, like inspection activity, for instance. The new law will provide the inspection holidays for the small and mid-sized companies also. Some new support of greenfields and SMEs. SMEs very focused of our strategy right now. I mean, tax privileges, I mean, the special quotas for demand from the budget and the government-affiliated companies' budget also. It can help them. And the regulation of that sphere also. We will introduce the special immunities for SMEs by the anti-monopoly procedures. It also can help in that very direction. So we still believe in the market, and we're trying to support the market fundamentals.
Okay, I just want to let our audience know that we are live on CNBC globally at this point, and we will be dipping in and out of the panel discussion throughout CNBC programming. So a warm welcome wherever you're tuning into. We are in St. Petersburg at the International Economic Forum, and we're talking about the new model for the Russian economy from here on in. You, Mr. Ulyakayev, I think, came out very quickly after the central bank this week cut interest rates, and you said, great, but not enough. And the one thing that an efficient economy working on a capitalist model needs, if you believe in the market, is it needs that lifeblood of cash, liquidity, capital. Mr. Sulianov, if I can come to you, Where do you stand on the debate that's currently taking place here between Governor Nabiullina, who says inflation is the problem and keeps interest rates at 11.5%, or Mr. Ulyakayev, who says we can come down faster? Even the bank's own forecast says we're going to get to low single-digit numbers in inflation by 2017. Isn't it time we saw either the central bank or you with your own budget make more capital available for the Russian economy?
Я буду по-русски говорить.
May I speak Russian, please?
Согласна с оценкой Алексея и Эльвиры о том, что мы
I quite agree
к
with
началу следующего года
Alexei's and Elvira's evaluation that we have a single-digit inflation rate by the end of this year. But we need to make a few steps. We need to adjust our finance to the new conditions in which we're in, the decreasing oil prices and the sanctions, as you were saying. But this also has a positive effect on our economy. We have stopped being ill with the Dutch disease because earlier only the export-oriented industry developed, like oil and gas. Now we have the potential for development and the filling of the niches that were formerly filled with imports. It's important for us not to fall down into the inflation spiral, and we must not increase our spending in keeping with the inflation rate, because if we do that, we will repeat the mistake of our neighbors who kept doing that and deprived themselves of economic growth, or other countries which believed it is necessary to finance the social obligations in keeping with the inflation rate. We cannot afford to spend as much as what we used to spend at the price of $100 a barrel of oil, and the revenue that we didn't earn, the oil revenue, we all spent it on wages and high incomes of people, and now we are having a financial system we should have had. And now, in answer to your question, in order to bring down the inflation rate, we need to adjust the budget to the potential of the economy. We have made the first step this year, and we can witness a decrease in the inflation rate. In the past week, it was less than 0.1%, and before the end of the year, the inflation rate can be about 2%, and that's the reason for the interest rates to be brought down, which will make credit accessible, which is badly needed now. We have an advantage now after the devaluation of the ruble and after the price of our costs going down, labor becoming cheaper and the economy becoming more attractive. What we need is resources, internal resources, because we are being deprived of external resources, but we need cheap credit. We need our anchor investor, non-government pension funds, the launching of the new pension system, and the launching of tools to attract resources like bonds related or linked to the inflation rate with floating coupons. We've become more attractive and interesting, and enterprises will be able to attract resources as well.
There is a saying where I come from that the government keeps using at the moment, and it's you repair your roof when the sun shines to prepare for the day when it rains. If we look at the Russian experience at the moment, what are we going to have? Negative 3.5%. By anybody's imagination, that sounds like a rainy day. You have one of the lowest debt to GDP ratios of economies around the world. You have some flexibility, even though I understand the current government deficit may be running away a little bit. You've gone back to the bond market, you've issued 2s and 5s, the market has taken them. There is a desperate need for yield in the rest of the world, given how low American and European interest rates are. Russia could step in and provide some of that paper, either through Eurobond issuance or just providing your own ruble-denominated debt. Now we have stability. Some of that money you could use to help with the restructuring of the economy, improve the capital stock, sell the state-owned enterprises that are inefficient and not performing. What about doing that? What about going out with a new Eurobond, perhaps raising more capital, or even change Ms. Nabiulina's remit at the central bank so that she can pursue growth and perhaps even some form of QE?
Вы знаете, мы,
You know,
конечно, будем привлекать
as a matter of fact, we are
капитал,
going to attract capital, and first and foremost in the
ставим
internal
перед собой
market.
задачу
But we set a
сокращать
goal
дефицит бюджета. В этом году мы
to bring
ожидаем
down the deficit in the budget,
порядка
and we
3%
expect a
ВВП,
deficit
чуть ниже.
of about 3% of the
И ставим перед собой
GDP, maybe a
задачу
little bit
в течение 3 лет
lower.
снижать его,
And our
обеспечить
goal is to bring it
2017
down
году практически
within 3
бездефицитный
years,
бюджет.
so that we should have a
Мы,
non-deficit
несмотря на
budget. And
низкий уровень
despite
долга по
the
отношению к ВВП,
low
не
level
собираемся
of debt,
достигать
well, in proportion to the GDP, we are not going to try and reach the results of our European colleagues who do not know what to do with their debt. For Russia, that debt will be a lot more expensive, and that is a burden for us. And we see that we are now working on the new securities, and there is a demand for them. And we are trying to attract foreign investors, and the investors are interested in participating in the financial market. And we'll be issuing new securities which are tied to inflation, and we will be trying to do everything to bring down inflation. Who will be issuing inflation coupon securities? So we are going to issue securities interesting for the market, and we are sure that foreign investors will be coming to us, and we hope that after stabilization of finance will resume our economic growth. And we need a new quality of growth, which is based on investment, not on current consumption. And all the rent which we had from our resources, all the profits, we used for consumption. We cannot use the same scheme. We need investment, and I think that financial investments will be followed by direct investment. And the most important thing today is to wait maybe a year, or maybe half a year, for finance to stabilize, and after that we'll have the stabilization of the economy. And that is the scenario we see ahead, and that is the goal we set.
Mr. Kudrin, as a former finance minister, I welcome your response to what you've heard from the gentlemen who are currently in government. I think you have a certain amount of flexibility about what you can say that maybe they're not allowed at this point. And as you address that, maybe I could also ask you, what happened to your 2010 privatization program? I was expecting to see Rostelcom or Rosneft or Aeroflot in private hands by now, but that hasn't happened.
Well, first and foremost, Russia has a great challenge to go over to the new model of the economy, non-dependent on oil prices, and to support investment and to start economic growth. We need structural reform. You ask a question, where to take resources, where to take the money? Is it the money from the central bank or stabilization fund or for investors? The major resources are being formed with the savings from this economy, and we've got to raise savings, and that should be profitable for everybody. And resources would be intact when they are in the economy, and all the rates should be positive. The inflation should be low, and it should be really profitable to save resources. Foreign investments make up 15% of all the investment from all the funds. So the similar situation is in China. With investments, best technologies are coming into the country. But anyway, the most important things are formed within the country. And then the question again, so what should we do to form such savings, and how should they be channeled to investment? Because today we we have some 20% of the GDP, which is savings. And I think that as of today, the figure is 24, 25. That is the figure for savings. As for the savings from investments, that is 17%. 17, 18. We do have resources, but the resources are not invested into Russia. And for that matter, we need structural reforms which will bring down the costs for business and will revive business. And I'm going back to the program of privatization. A huge share of state companies, that is the main disproportion in the economy. So state companies, government companies are not really flexible, they're not transparent, and that is really something which hinders the development of the Russian economy, and we need competition. And unfortunately, I cannot say that I am the author of the privatization program of 2010-2011. It was approved in 2011 finally. And while I was in my position, well, it was approved, but later on the government gave it up. So it was for political reasons on the one hand, on the other hand, that was because of the market situation. But anyway, that characterizes that the government was not ready to bring down the share of the state in the economy. But anyway, we've got to see very serious challenges of fundamental nature, which our demography sets for us. So we have difficulties with the pension system, with the labor market, which actually brings down the rate of development, and we have a very bad structure of the budget, and we do not spend much money for the infrastructure. Then we have the relationships between the regions and the center. Our regions do not have enough resources. They actually stopped investing. Well, the problem of the budget system in general is that before the crisis, all the oil revenue was actually spent. And we do not have any possibility for counter-cyclic maneuver. And when the government does not have a possibility to increase funding, to encourage the development, so that is the situation when you need an umbrella when it rains. And the government has to work in a pro-cyclic manner, sometimes maybe increase certain components of the crisis. So what I mean is that the Russian money should really be invested into Russia and not, it shouldn't.
Just a very brief answer, if I might ask. Given what you've said about the privatization program, and given Mr. Ulyakayev said Russia is committed to a market economy, do you see the growing sense of the state taking back parts of the economy, or indeed not pursuing those privatization programs, as temporary whilst we're in a period of crisis, or is this a wholesale rewinding back to a period prior to the growth years of 08, 07, 09, 2010? How do you analyze this? Do you think the government still believes in the market from what it does?
Нет, я считаю, что правительство и президент привержены.
I believe that the government and the president are committed to reform, to the market economy. I do not see that we're going back to the state economy, no, but on the other hand, we do not see that something happens, something contrary happens. Well, we can go back to the history of privatization. So we know the story when Rosneft was buying out assets and Rostelecom was bought out by the government and Внешэконом Bank, and I'd regard it as a separate project with its own logics, and Rostelecom was not efficient enough, well, in the former structure it used to have. But at the same time, I think that the government is not going to nationalize enterprises, and I think that there is no turning back.
Very briefly.
Coming back to this slowdown of privatization, for me it's very easy. Nothing personal, just business. You cannot easily buy your ownership on the declining market. Look, by the period of SPO of Sberbank, it costs 110. Now it's 75. By the SPO of VTB, it costs 13.6. Now it's 8. We could be crazy, to sell on that market this assets with no fair price.
The experience in the UK has been at times, and in fact always, the asset has been sold below market value because you needed to sell the asset, so you have to make it attractive. In the markets, you have a saying, some for you, some for me. That's how we get a deal. And in the UK experience, sometimes they've sold assets below value, but what they've ended up with is more efficient companies that have been less of a drag on the government in the long run, and ultimately have paid higher taxes back because profits have improved and employees have been taken on. If the government wanted to, it could sell at a loss, but it would gain the fruits of pushing that business into the private sector.
Excuse me, probably we talk about different Britons, because I know the other British experience. During 2008, they buy below market, and now they sell much up. They're making money. They're clever.
Well, you talk about RBS and the experience of Lloyd's, but I mean, I don't want to get, I'm not a representative of the British government, but what I will say,
I appreciate British government by that.
But in the circumstances, what they did is they followed the advice that's been handed down through the centuries from central bankers way back to the beginning, is that at times of a liquidity crisis, you take action and you act quickly and you act decisively. And right now, the British economy doesn't look so bad, does it? On a European,
very good.
But anyway, let's not go down that avenue because we're here to talk about Russia. So let me come to Mr. Makarov, and I wanted to just come to you on the point that I made at the beginning, where I had this conversation with Boris Titov, and he was saying entrepreneurs are unhappy. They feel the costs are going up, taxes are going up. They're getting pressure around quotas and so on. I wonder if you could just address that for us and talk about the direction that hopefully Russia can go in, where business people feel that they don't have to wait so long through the year before they start paying themselves for their own hard work.
I'd like to go back to what Mr. Lukayev has said. He actually recollected the meaning of the Chinese symbol of the crisis, and President Kennedy spoke about that during his election campaign. So, there are differences in opinion. Some people would like to see one side of the coin and see the threats, and other people would see something different, the positive signs. You are speaking about the problems relating to business, and certainly we have them. But had you talked to business representatives some 10 years ago, and you see people from business here, as a matter of fact, you'd hear quite a different story. Well, 10 years ago, tax services were called as the most corrupt service among the three. And now, when we speak about tax services, well, they are not even among the 20 most corrupt agencies. Why did it happen?
The other 20.
Вы знаете, это просто займет очень много времени.
You know, it'll take too long, and I'm afraid that that is not the most important and interesting thing for the people who are watching us in Great Britain. You'll find the information in the media. Well, we fixed the principle when the burden of proof is not belongs not to the tax body, but not to the taxpayer, but to the tax body. So the taxpayer does not have to prove anything. And we fixed that in the law. We wanted to limit the possibilities of administrative impact. And now going back to the problem which you had, well, privatization. We are for privatization, but the situation should not really repeat when the profit was actually privatized while the costs were nationalized. So you spoke about Aeroflot. I think that is one of the best companies in the world, and it is developing very well. Maybe it is worthwhile to privatize something which gives benefits, but not those things which are easily sold when the market is falling. So we're now in the situation where we are having a fall in the spiral. At the same time, we have crisis, and we need consolidation. And maybe we should work on those issues which are very important for the economy, and not rush from one side to the other. And just a very brief thing, I'd like to draw attention to just one thing. While analyzing the economic situation in Russia and the measures taken, as if we are in a laboratory and we do not have 150 million people of the population to whom we are responsible. So, and we should not really separate the reforms from real life, from the government and the parliament. And the most important thing is that the government's activity is controlled by the parliament, and that is the main guarantee that the reform here in this country will be successful.
It's always good to have a system of checks and balances in place, Mr. Makarov. Thank you very much indeed for that. And your words are well taken. I don't think anybody sits here in judgment. There are different models. The question is, which model do you want to embrace going forward? And let me then bring this conversation to our business community and welcome back our CNBC audience who are joining us from wherever you are in the world. Thank you for being with us here in St. Petersburg. Oleg Deripaska, let me come to you. I want to pick up on some of the points that were made here, but I also want to ask you how much easier or more difficult has doing business become in Russia over the last 2 years? Are you glass half full or glass half empty when it comes to the outlook 12, 24 months from here for both domestic Russian businesses and foreign businesses that are based here or want to work here?
It's not a simple answer because there is some area where we can, see tremendous progress, as Mr. Makarov said, in the tax. There are some area where we feel, and it was exposed a lot of new problems. But I would say that markets in Russia at this moment looking for new equilibrium points. We can talk about agriculture, land, property, commodity, and I think it's all caused by this shock after sanction. And I wouldn't even call it crisis. And I think Russia in transitions, it would be even from after 3-4 years, or maybe in 5 years, you know, Russia will never come back, and it's impossible. You know, we shouldn't come back to the old shoes. You know, it's clear. And first of all, of course, you know, it's important to find political resolution, and this is a major shock for the markets. You know, dispute with the West, and you know, Ukrainian crisis. And second, it's important to define what would be our new model. You know, not just for the growth, but also how we promote the market economy. And what we can see now, and it's very important, interesting debate. You know, the only problem, it's mostly for outside, you know, viewers. In Russia, we can't see such a debate exactly on this point. And in my view, it's a speeches. It's not measures. You know, it's not measures yet. It's not action yet. It's a speeches. It's a debate in terms of we test the water, and it's maybe can show us in a good direction where we should go. And maybe it's good that we not, you know, spoil all resources. We not immediately deploy, you know, all, you know, funds which we have. You know, we need to define. And as I said, you know, it's important, you know, to find political resolution, because otherwise, you know, money could be spent for nothing. There could be a new wave of sanctions which create new challenges. And as I said, you know, it's a transition. We will definitely should forget about, you know, the state capitalism. We should, you know, see smaller role of government, you know, and as a measures, you know, government must sell. You know, there are so many assets which they don't need. You know, and it's not just, you know, company. You know, there is many assets, local and state companies, which could be offloaded, and it will create, you know, new opportunity for small, you know, medium-sized business, for the big business, for, you know, foreign investment. And, you know, we need to do something with the land. There is, you know, nice picture about Russian land, but you couldn't access to this land. It's quite complicated process actually to buy land and you know, put it either in development or in agriculture. You know. And government has a lot of rights which they should easily collateralize. And I don't agree that we shouldn't sell now. We can hold another 10 years. You know, life couldn't wait. You know, and this is a new reality. You know, and there is a prices which market could justify, and we should go forward. There was a few issues, you know, with antitrust should be correct, and key point for, you know, further development, of course, you know, it's you know, reform of the legal system, and you know, we need to check again, you know, how efficient our, you know, court, you know, processes, because there are some result which is scaring. And it's create, you know, major, you know, problem for investors to define. But as I said, you know, we're not in crisis, you know, literally, we're in transition, and this transition, you know, may take, you know, another, you know, couple of years. And you know, most important is to find political resolution.
Let me just run along the panel here, and Kirill, if you don't mind, I'm just going to leapfrog you for a moment, because I think coming off the back of what you just said, Mikhail Shamalin, I want to pick up with you. We had a conversation earlier in the week where we talked a little bit about Bashneft, and whilst there may be good legal reasons for what happened, the perception externally was that this was the Russian government overextending its authority to take back a private asset. And I think that the bit that was initially quite difficult for outside observers to understand was why the chairman of the company had to be put under immediate house arrest, because that added a certain threat to the whole story. Now, I know that this is an uncomfortable area, but if I could just ask you, have Western observers misunderstood what happened in this case, or should we be concerned that there are political forces still at work that are determining business outcomes?
Well, we do not make a political story out of what happened, and I can tell you that in our company we have invested in 17 various sectors, and we make money in 16 out of the 17, and where we lose, the only sector where we lose is the banking sector, and we have a bank of our own. We are not alone. its net profit was negative in 2014, but all the rest, from mobile telephony to private medicine and agriculture, the industrial complex and services, we make money there, and the gloomy picture often depicted of the Russian economy from our perspective is not really true. And there are business opportunities in Russia. One can make money, and private businesses do develop. Regulation is improving, and we, as an investor, we intend to stay in Russia, and we see opportunities. We do have the expertise in the market, and we work normally. What we really should talk about is the issue of productivity in the country at large and the structure of employment. And the issue that comes to the foreground is the number of working people that produce value-added products or add value. And there are various estimates. Our analysts believe that out of the 80 million employed in this country, only 15 or 17 make added value. All the rest work in the sectors or enterprises that do not produce any added value. And this is a big problem because the smaller part of those employed feed the bigger part that do not create value, plus retirees, children, and so on. And in a situation when the country had additional revenue from the high oil price, it continued for a rather long time, but it will now dwindle. And in order to be competitive internationally and to manufacture goods that could sell in international markets, apart from commodities, we need to raise productivity and to reduce the number of jobs that do not create value. And I can cite innumerable examples of foreign companies like Chinese or Korean, where people have a productivity several times higher than that of our company. Companies like Samsung and others, where work productivity and intensity and the pressure of the labor market on the people employed is so great that it enables the company to build up. We have to follow the same road. There's no other. And the pressure on employees for them to intensify their work should really increase. And when we try to create conditions for people to work more intensively, many of them quit and find jobs elsewhere and in other sectors and companies for the same level of salary. At least these things happened last year. And this way we cannot raise productivity, and in my view, this is a big issue for us. And also, as a part of the process, we should view the privatization process, because we would like to see more opportunities for investment in this country, more companies that we could purchase and to raise the efficiency of our production. We have taken part in privatization contests, and we won some of them. We do have tools to raise efficiency, but the debate about whether to sell or not to sell, at what price and at what time, my philosophy is that in principle it is not quite clear why should the government, aside from the strategic sectors associated with national security that cannot be handed over to private hands, but company management itself is a very difficult job. We need to spend a lot of time and effort to run a company efficiently. Why does the government need this management function is a big issue, because from my view, the government should collect taxes to the extent it wants to get them. Companies should be run by other people, and the government should not assume those functions that it finds difficult to perform. So I am a proponent of privatization. I want it to continue because it can resolve or at least help resolve the issue of productivity, and it can help expand the number of jobs that produce value.
Okay, I understand why you've avoided the question that I asked you and given me another answer, and that's fine. In the circumstances, I understand the sensitivity, but maybe we can move to the wisdom of crowds here for a moment. And I address this question to everybody in the audience. There is, with this story, one way, I guess, of disproving the multiple conspiracy theories surrounding this Bashneft business, and the one would be to put this business back to private tender for somebody in the free market to buy it. Now, maybe if I could just ask for a show of hands in the room as to who thinks this would be the appropriate way for the Bashneft energy business to come back into private ownership. Or perhaps your feelings are different. Perhaps you feel it should remain a state-run entity and ultimately remain in state hands. But if you feel that maybe a way that the Russian government can demonstrate to the rest of the world its free market credentials is to do that, can I ask you to put up your hand? No one's filming you. You'll be okay. The cameras are all looking this way. Okay. Okay. Who thinks it should stay in state hands? Can I ask you to put your hands up? Well, there are either a lot of people undecided in the room. Go on.
The problem is elsewhere. The problem is that you raised the question in a way that our government should prove something to somebody. But I believe that the issue of Bashneft privatization is not a matter of proving to the world of something. It's a purely economic issue, and to translate it into the sphere of proving something, I think it's not right.
Very briefly.
Yeah. Look, generally, the oil-producing companies is very market companies. They do not need really government framework, government support. So, for my mind, not only Bashneft, but other government-owned oil companies have to be somehow and somewhen sell to the market.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Very quickly, Mr. Kudrin.
I also believe that all oil and gas companies, including Gazprom's, will be privatized. There must be a plan for that. Let it be strategic. Let it cover a period of 20 years, but we should move along this road. But now, when the assets are valued very low, and some oil companies have super profits, they have increased their exports and their revenue has increased, and if one begins to sell government companies, then the export sector will quickly buy those companies, and there will be a quick concentration of companies in private hands taken over from the state, and it will be the buyers will be those that are at an advantage now. So I would be very cautious about privatization at this given point in time, because this would be seen as unfair. But I would delay that until the prices are more fair.
Thank you. Sorry, Oleg?
Just asking when we expect that the price will go up. Just make sure that we understand the timeline.
That's right. What's your business? Why do you not sell your business?
Gentlemen, let me take control once again as the chair. And we can have, I'd love to have this conversation over another couple of hours, but I know that the forum won't let me. Kirill, I want to come to you because you're sort of gamekeeper turned poacher, if I can use that term, because you've been in government, you've worked with the presidential office, and now ultimately you're in the capital game, the private equity business. Have Russian assets become more or less attractive? And what can be done by the gentleman here to make Russia more attractive as a destination for capital? Because the last, 18 months has only seen capital flight from this economy.
Okay. Let me bring a little bit different angle to that. What is investment process? To my mind, it's a function of 4 parts. First one is investment horizon. The second one is expected liquidity. The third one is an appetite to the risk. And the last one is expected return. In terms of expected liquidity, there are not much buyers, so there is not much liquidity currently at the market. Investment horizon. There is no long-term capital at the market. We don't have pension funds. We don't have insurance company who can commit a long-term capital. So the investment horizon is very short. I would say not much than 12 months. Expected return. It's always the function of risks. The risks are high, and they're getting higher and higher because of geopolitical situation. So expected return will be really high in all kinds of the deals. It doesn't matter private markets or public markets. So where it leads us? We're not investors any longer. All of us who used to be called institutional investors now are not doing direct investments. We're all dealing with the special situations. We're all involved in special situations. That may give you a nice return in the short term, but unfortunately brings no value to our country. We should clearly understand that. I think I cannot add much to all of my colleagues and friends on the panel about what has to be done. The key word already been mentioned. To my mind, the key word is competition, but there are different ways of how to improve this competition.
Okay, I'll take that. Thank
Sorry
you
for being a little bit academic.
No, absolutely. If that's the way you feel about it, then that's quite appropriate. Oleg, if I can come to you. We've heard a lot of comments expressed, and at times you can see there is a real debate breaking out on the panel here about just exactly where this country is going and whether a new model is necessary at this point. Can I ask you just to weigh in from your perspective and share with us your thoughts as to one thing that could be done which would dramatically change the perception, both for Russians and for others, that reform is real and we're not just stuck in some groundhog loop where everybody keeps talking about it but nobody actually does anything that changes it?
Thank you. Actually, it's quite a general question. I'll try to answer. From my point of view, you're absolutely right saying that perception. And perception today in the Russian economy among the entrepreneurs and companies generally is not very positive by many reasons. Of course, there is the argument that there is some sort of difficult period of economic development, sanctions, lack of access to the capital markets, changing in the regime of major economic indicators. But from my point of view, how to change the perception? I think the most significant step on the side of the state authorities belongs to the understanding of the business and probably to take a decision internally to make economic interest ahead of political interest. Let's look let's say the set of legislation adopted by the Russian parliament, which actually damage the businesses, creates some additional transaction costs, creates the difficulties, and to reduce perception, to block perception, positive perception. Because people ask, for what? What is the purposes of such decisions? It's just an example. Also, mentality and, let's say, mission of the state also should be rethinked. Today, mission of the state among the understanding of major, let's say, ministries, players, is to control the economy, to control the companies, to control activity, because just to avoid, just to avoid taxation, to protect companies against the fire problems and so on, a lot of. But in reality, good state mostly missioned to create conditions and to organize harmonized development of the business. I think it's mentality changes which should be also incorporated into the government. Of course, just you mentioned in the beginning that the capacity of utilization, efficiency of Russian companies are relatively lower than, let's say, among the competitors in the world. What is the reason? Lack of capital? Yes, to some extent that's right, but look the capital outflow. Probably lack of motivation. Yes, from my point of view, in some cases, Russian owners of Russian companies quite reluctant to the low efficiency. Why? Probably because they have no strong motivation to increase capacity of utilization. And why this reluctance exists? It's a very difficult question, and probably participants of this panel can answer. My assumption is that actually the problem probably is in the regulation environment is selective to some extent. Protection of property rights is, we cannot say that this regulation is unconditional, that property rights unconditional in this country. No, to some extent we have examples then that's not right. Probably some owners got the assets, just got these assets, not was responsible to create these assets. It's also maybe a problem of motivation. And we have to actually analyze these problems precisely and to push some buttons in the government regulation, in the mentality, in order to change approach to the businesses.
Oleg, thank you so much. I think you really nailed some very important points.
Because your question was too general. No, my answer is too general.
No, but it elicited a tremendous response, and I think you put your finger on a lot of important issues that do need to be addressed. Dennis Nally, I'd like to bring you in. Do you have a microphone? If we could just give you a microphone. Dennis is the chairman of PwC International and has done a lot of work recently at looking at attitudes within Russian companies and Russian businesses. Dennis, I wonder if you can just share that with us. Are people feeling that things are getting better from here?
Sure. Just a couple comments very briefly. We've conducted a very extensive survey, most recently, just published. I encourage you to get your hands on it. About 3,000 people, about 240 businesses across Russia.
Will it be free to anybody who wants it?
It is available within our website, absolutely.
Okay.
Free. So, but very interesting observations. One is that the confidence levels of the business community is actually higher than the confidence levels of the general public, which was, given some of the conversation that took place on this panel, sort of interesting. But I think it's fair to say even within the business community, dealing with a number of challenges, declining revenues, higher costs, impacts on margins. That translates, at least the way we look at it, as a very short-term focus in terms of what business is really concentrated on. I think we heard that from some of our panelists. I think the big challenge, quite frankly, is how do you start to move from the short term to the longer term, and what can be done from a policy standpoint to really encourage businesses to begin investing once again. Investing differently maybe than what we've done historically. How do you encourage smaller and medium-sized businesses to start up, less regulation, more available financing, maybe even use some crowdsourcing capabilities to really get additional funding for those smaller businesses. But ultimately, I think the kinds of reforms that you've been talking about, which is providing policies, tax incentives to really encourage investment for the longer term, providing stability in terms of regulatory reform. Those are the types of things that will get the mindset shift from the short term to the longer term that I think then can ultimately return this economy to a growth economy, which I think everyone's talking about.
Dennis,
So,
thank you very much for the comments. And Dennis has made available this research, so you can go and find it if you choose to. Christopher, can I bring you in? And please give us another perspective on what you've heard here. And it seems to me there is a heartfelt commitment for progress to move down the road. But as usual, there seem to be barriers and speed humps.
That's precisely the point. What needs to be done is to improve the business environment so that people are more willing to invest. Now, if you look at where the brightest young people in the West, the ones coming out of the top schools, what do they want to do? They want to go into startups. How do you do a startup? You do it if the business environment, setting up a company is easy and quick. I mean, these are people coming out of business schools, economics departments, yet they do it. If they want to close down because the business is not doing well, the legal environment should be quick and easy and not stigmatize them for the rest of their careers. Once you do that, then you get more investment and more enterprise coming from the lower end of the market. But I should also add my comment, controversial it might be, about privatizations. It's very, very rarely the case that it's a good idea to wait about privatizing state enterprises, because once you know they're going to be privatized, the managers don't have an incentive to invest and increase productivity, and the price goes down. The market environment is secondary to selling. What's important with value of enterprises is what's being done inside those companies, and just doing nothing and waiting until the market improves usually is not a good idea. Whereas and then there is a second side to the coin of low value in the market for the companies to be privatized. A good investment for the proceeds from privatized companies is to use them to invest in infrastructure to improve productivity in private companies. Where just like the companies that are being privatized are low because the market is depressed, infrastructure investment will be cheaper to undertake, and therefore the rate of return will be much higher once you privatize. So there are two ways of acting it. One is at the top end with the privatized big of state enterprises. The other one is at the lower end by encouraging startups, by freeing up the regulation environment for small companies.
Very interested the point you make about young people, because this is my experience coming in and out of this economy, that 2 years ago we had very excited founders of online businesses who felt that they were part of something new that was taking place. This year it's very difficult to find those people and to get them to talk to you, because many of them are now in the United States or in other countries because they've decided that this is not where they can build a business. How do we address that?
You see, that's exactly, if you go to Silicon Valley, a lot of the people operating there are not Americans, they're Europeans and other nationalities who move there because the environment is better. I think you address it as I was saying. One is that you make it a lot easier for them to start up. You know, no long waiting, no big costs. But equally important is to make it easy for them to close down the companies. There is fear in many countries that once you go bankrupt, then you can never again get a loan about anything. Whereas in the States, in Silicon Valley, sometimes they're proud about their big failures. They say, oh, you know, I had this crazy idea. I thought it was going to make me millions. And it bombed, and look at it now. And now I'm doing something different. No one will tell you, oh, you know, therefore you can never raise a loan for a company. You can never raise a loan to buy a house after this, because when you are filling in forms like we do it in many European countries, I suspect in Russia as well, it says, have you ever failed, or has anyone ever denied, or have you ever gone bankrupt? And if you say yes, then you're stigmatized. In the States, that's not the case, and that's very important for young people, that they don't have that fear in them that they might fail and never again be able to operate.
Okay, thank you very much for making the comments. William Engdahl, let's come to you. I have deliberately, through the course of the last hour, not talked about Boris Nemtsov's murder. I have not talked about Ukraine. I have not talked about this week's tit-for-tat commentary on weaponry and the 40 ICBMs that apparently are going to be added to the nuclear arsenal. But all of these issues, of course, come to bear as we think about Russia in a broader context. I wonder if you can just help me knit some of those things in that we haven't really discussed.
Well, I think the most interesting situation that we find right now, if we step back from Russia and look at the entire global picture, as I see it as an economist and a political risk analyst, is we see a transition in the entire globe right now where the 1944 Bretton Woods system has broken down, definitely broken down. Markets are not free in my view, Jeff, but they are man-made. And what I see right now is the possibility for an avant-garde role to be played by Russia, China, the BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation countries, and so forth, to build a new series of markets, man-made markets in Central Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and so forth. And that is what I've been watching. Now, the old order, if you want to call it, the status quo, is not very happy with some of those developments. I think that's a little bit the background to the conflict in Ukraine, to the business in Syria, and so forth. And if I look, and I've studied geopolitics and the situation since the end of the Cold War very intensely, I've written several books on it, Russia is being provoked, and they're quite right in realizing that they're being provoked militarily through the business in Ukraine. As George Friedman of Stratfor said, this was the most blatant coup d'etat in American history against the elected government in Ukraine, and bringing a ragtag bunch of people in there to hot up the situation to try to stir up things with Russia. So the economic debate that we're having here is very interesting for me, has to be situated in the context of that. The 40 ICBMs that President Putin mentioned were a response to the NATO heavy armament of the areas in Poland and Lithuania surrounding Kaliningrad, a strategic military naval base and air base of Russia. So there's that, the situation in other parts that are surrounding Russia. So it's the missile defense, which is no defense in military terms, it's very offensive. In Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Bulgaria, Turkey, that's all aimed not at Iran, it's not aimed at North Korea, it's aimed directly at Russia as the only nuclear power that can give the nuclear arsenal of the United States a formidable challenge. So we're in a military situation as well as an economic situation, and I don't think that that can be separated. It's very conventional to look at Russia through a one-sided looking glass, which says everything Russia does is aggressive and bad, but I think there's another side. If we shift that prism, we can see that there have been very, very provocative steps taken by Washington and by NATO and by Jens Stoltenberg and others, that General Breedlove, that give cause for great concern in not only the Kremlin, but in the world. So
okay.
That's...
Well, thank you very much for bringing another perspective on the story. So look, I'm going to be in serious trouble if I don't bring this current gathering to a close fairly shortly, because there is a much bigger one coming up in a wee while that we all need to get to. So let me just run very quickly along here, and I just want to raise one more issue before we wrap up here. There is a distinguished guest here in St. Petersburg, the Prime Minister of Greece. We have a situation that even the central bank governor said to me this week, we all need to be thinking about what the consequences might be for the European growth recovery if we end up with a Greek exit from the Eurozone. Mr. Ulyakayev, should Russia just stand by and not offer more financial assistance at this point?
I don't think so, because of different reasons. Because of the situation with our budget, we need money ourselves. And generally, there is, it could be, and our officials mentioned it before, we can somehow support the investments of pipeline from the Turkish line to the other European countries if it will pass by the Greek territory. In that case, we are ready to somehow finance it. But I don't think we can buy bonds issued by Greeks.
Do you, you are a keen analyst of the situation, I know. Do you see a certain amount of, in the behavior of the other Eurozone countries, a desire to punish Greece for its behavior in the same way that Russia maybe gets punished at times by the Western community?
Probably it will not be very, correct, politically correct from my side to interfere in European deals.
Oh, Russia's part of Europe as well, even though you have a pivot east.
Yeah, of course, we are part of Europe, and our proposal was and is to create a free trade zone from Lisbon to Vladivostok. We very much advocates of free trade, and big four freedoms: freedom of movement of goods, freedom of movement of services, labor and capitals. And then you ask about concerns about young people coming from Russia to the United States and Europe. But what is globalization? That's okay, that's moving of labor. The point which is I'm interested is if they will come back or not. If we'll come back with new knowledge, with new best practices. So that's okay.
Okay, you neatly sidestepped and moved us on, but we'll move to Mr. Sulyanov. The British, I hate to keep talking about the British, because it's not like I hold a candle for the government specifically, but George Osborne today said, we do not expect a Greek exit, but we are prepared in case. Would that also be the view from the Russian government or through the finance minister?
We're interested in the stability of the situation in the Eurozone, and that's why the exit of Greece from the European Union is not going to bring any dividends to anybody. And we always stood for Greece implementing the reforms which are needed to make its economy more sound. Well, as for the rate of the reform and the terms for the reform and the social aspect of that and how implementable that is the issue for negotiations, well, the EU on the one side and the authorities of Greece. So naturally, we should not really allow any extraordinary situations that will not be a benefit to anybody.
Mr. Kudrin, I just want to wrap with you. What message do you think Alexis Tsipras should take back from his time here in St. Petersburg? Do the Russian people or government feel reluctant to be perceived to be interfering in matters that are Eurozone focused? What should he go home with?
Дело в том, что проблема Греции не в том, что не хватает денег, а в том, что
the problem is that the problem of Greece is not that Greece lacks money, the problem is that they have low productivity. Greece is using a rather strong euro, and at the same time they have minimal incentives for the economy. There were several rescue programs for Greece, and each next problem actually started with the words that we underestimated Greek problems, and well, there are more problems, and the next problem should increase the support for Greece. And now we're aware that we've reached a certain limit when the population of Greece itself, due to different circumstances, are not really ready to shrink their possibilities. And Europe, too, is not ready to forgive Greece their debts, etc., etc. And I think that the decision should be taken, despite the fact that either the Greeks or Europe would want Greece to exit the EU. Well, my focus was that Greece would have to leave the Eurozone, and the living standards would worsen, but on a voluntary basis. That cannot happen. They will have to leave EU. What I wouldn't like Mr. Tsipras take away from Russia, I would hate the situation when Russia would promise something which would make him relax. Mr. Tsipras should be aware that Greece faces real problems, that these problems should be resolved. And if we invested into Greece, that would be very risky. But other economic cooperation, trade, well, prior to the exit from EU or after it. So I think that could be interesting and benefit Greece and our country, and that would be even more interesting.
Look, none of this stuff is easy, and that's the reason why I think we've had such an engaging conversation over the last hour and 15 minutes. It's a very short period of time to try and really move the debate forward. But I have the greatest of respect for everybody who's been prepared to come up and take my questions this afternoon. Can I ask you please to show your thanks to our distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen.